When they reached Cuckoldia, they were pleasantly surprised to observe from a distance that many Vagiran were leaving the city, carrying goods and driving cattle westwards. They were surely heading for Flytrap. Gregorian held the phallus as if it were a spear, and urged his fairies onward to take the city. As they speedily approached, the women who were already leaving did so now with haste. The gates to the city were down. However, the small number of Vagiran guards posted outside Cuckoldia attempted to make a defence. Several fags were shot down from their horses as they came closer. But for the women, the force of the enemy was too great. Those who stood their ground were simply trampled into the sand under the hooves of the onrushing stallions. The bears led the way into the former home of the macho Amarad, closely followed by the king himself. As the rest of Gregorian's troops roared into the city, they could see that this was a much smaller force than they had fought previously. Still, there was fierce fighting in all quarters of the city, with the Vagiran putting up a fanatical defence. They were able to kill a significant number of the faggots they hated so deeply, but in the end the numbers game caught up with them. Now they were at the mercy of the biggest faggot in the world. Gregorian ordered that not a single female should be left alive in the city. With the battle finally won, the bears ordered the deaths of all those who had been taken captive. They were unceremoniously thrown down a giant well in the south of former Maskul. All that is except one. The governess of Cuckoldia, Menopausia, was taken from the palace grounds and beheaded in front of cheering troops. Her head was then impaled on a rainbow-painted spike and set outside the main gates. Also inside the palace grounds, the gaze found the body of a eunuch hanging from the gallows. Gregorian ordered that it be cut down and thrown into the giant well with all the Vagiran corpses. The men of former Maskul, who had been made to serve the women of Cuckoldia, were liberated by Gregorian the Queer, upon which these proud men declared themselves lovers of cock, and pledged to serve under the new king. The conquering king made 2 decrees. Henceforth, this city was to be known as Cockfestia, and no woman shall ever set foot in this sacred land of faggotry. As with victory in fabulous, unprotected celebrations followed, the king and his bears lost themselves in the revelry. Gregorian had taken up residence in the palace's private chambers. This was a move that a small cell of Vagiran fanatics had foreseen. Had Gregorian not been so busy drinking and bumming, he could have seen this coming, but he failed to consult the phallus before going to bed that night. The Vagiran cell, led by Menstrolina, had hidden in a compartment within the private chambers, waiting for the right time to strike. In the dead of night, they did emerge to kill Gregorian and his bedmate with stealth and ruthlessness. The king's throat was cut, as was his lover's. Menstrolina grabbed the Phallus of Destiny and smiled a wicked smile. The cell had planned a way out of the city by a route of passages they had discovered, and must have been made during the rule of the macho Amarad. They were able to escape Cockfestia just before dawn, and started on the trek towards Flytrap. The cell was hoping that they would see some fellow Vagirans up ahead as they walked faster to reach their destination, but instead they were ambushed by a group of Dushtonian soldiers who had jumped out from forest cover, giving the cell no chance to defend themselves. The soldiers searched the women and discovered the Phallus of Destiny in their possession. They took the clay cock and did run through the Vagirans. These Dustonians were certain that they had done the right thing. These soldiers of Deustonia, who had before this encounter with the Vagiran been sitting around pissing and moaning about pay and work conditions, and smoking sog while on duty, were now filled with more profound concerns. They were not unaware of recent events. Cities had fallen, armies had been defeated and slaughtered, monarchs had met their end in most foul and humiliating ways. The world had not been a stable place before the recent carnage, by any stretch of the imagination, but nothing like this had happened in living memory. Soldiers talked among themselves, and wondered if they could be living in the end times. It had been foretold that the world would be destroyed in the most horrible fashion. Were recent occurrences a foreshadowing of things to come? Could the Almighty and his servant be about to appear? Deustonians believed that, as they were an intellectually superior people, that God, in his divine wisdom, would see fit to spare their city when he made his return to earth. In their society, as in others, original doctrine or inherited stories had changed over time and had been moulded into a narrative which served the purposes of the ruling class. Yes, the world would one day be destroyed, but this was simply to purge all the brutes and lesser races who displeased the Almighty. The Deustonians believed in a just creator, one who would naturally see the wisdom of preserving his finest people, namely them. The soldiers took the instrument of death and carnage back to Deustonia and delivered it to President Emo Nob. The president, however, refused to touch the beautifully sculpted Willy. He had been in long consultation with his Senate, and had spoken with the older and wiser among the city's number. He hadn't been sure whether or not the phallus would fall into his possession, and he wasn't sure if he believed everything which had been said about this object. But now he had it, and given recent events, he felt it best for his people that this thing be cast into the tar pit. This was surely the smartest course of action, and therefore the one God would approve of. And so the president put together a team of his smuggest, most self-congratulatory, most self-approving and pompous men. He then sent them forth to the tar pit to do his bidding. The team was well armed and encountered only a few would-be thieves from Rejectus on the way to the tar pit. They were seen off with a couple of blasts from recently invented boomsticks. As they reached the pit, the designated team member who was to cast the phallus forth into the pit stepped forward. Henry the hipster clutched the clay cock and was about to throw it into the thick black goo when a strange white smoke appeared in front of him. As the cloud began to clear, the troops could see a small green creature stood there smiling. It held out its hand as if to say stop. The creature spoke to the men as they looked on in amazement. The Guardian said, "This system of things, the world as you know it, has reached midnight. All that has happened according to his will. It will be of no consequence to reveal to you, little playthings, the origin of your world. It is his will that you know. Look upon this pit of foul tar. For this place, the first of your kind was brought forth by the Almighty. God did make a man called Tim, and a woman called Janice, and they did like the look of each other. They did copulate day and night, and did bring forth many sons and daughters, who did themselves produce more offspring. This didn't cause recessive traits or congenital birth defects, because God used his magic to stop that from occurring, or whatever. Anyway, the original children of God all lived in harmony in the first city of this world, Unitaris. It was a place of great happiness and productivity. But here is the thing. God, in his infinite love for his children, did give them free will. He gave you all the ability to choose between good and evil. Many chose to take the righteous path, to service the Lord on high, but many more chose the path of greed and unclean ambition. Some wanted power over all other people, though they could not control their own desires. Eventually, the city went to war with itself. The righteous of Unitaris were successful in driving the unrighteous out of the city. Those who had been thrown out did breed like rats, and they did fight among themselves. Over time, various groups banded together based on common bigotry, common lust, and common interest. These groups founded their own cities, cities which would attack or sometimes go to war with their neighbours. These wicked cities were able to put their differences aside for one common campaign, however. Jealous of the society that Unitaris had built by staying true to the Lord, who did speak to this city regularly, keeping them on track, the wicked cities did attack and destroy Unitaris, sparing not one of its inhabitants, and so the world fell into a state of unholy darkness. How do I know all of this? Because the Lord has allowed me to see. I am his servant on earth. Now, the time has come for you to give me that phallus. The troops stood looking at each other. In a flash, the Guardian snatched the phallus from the hand of Henry the hipster. Henry decided to speak up. He couldn't be the only one thinking what he was thinking. Henry said, how much of that little story you just told was actually true, dude? A lot of that sounded like bullshit. I have some questions about God and such. Why didn't the Lord save Unitaris from the wicked? Why did he give people free will if he knew that it was going to cause some shitstorm and shitstorm after shitstorm? And how come the Guardian appeared to ignore Henry at first, as he started to speak once more? The Guardian. This phallus shows the truth, and is always the servant of destiny. The arrogance and folly of man and womankind are undeniable. Also undeniable is that salvation can swiftly turn to destruction. As for my story, what the fuck does it matter, bitches? You're all fucked anyway. Know this, foolish little things. There is one God of all things, material and spiritual. He is the creator of many worlds, and he just got tired of this one. The Guardian, God's servant on earth, then placed the clay cock between his legs and started laughing. It seemed like an impossibility, booming laugh for a creature of its size, but then it started to grow before the eyes of the Douchdonians. Bigger and bigger it became, faster and faster it grew. The troops could not move from where they were. It was as if some unworldly power had fixed them to the spot. It wasn't long before the Guardian had turned into an enormous monster. So large was the monster that its head appeared to touch the clouds. This beast then stepped on the Douchdonians below, crushing them as a child might crush slugs underfoot. The phallus itself was no longer a clay cock. It had become a part of the Guardian. It was now a massive, throbbing green dick. What followed was utter destruction. The monster first went to Fabulous, and did beat the city into the ground with its gargantuan member. Next, Cockfestia was annihilated in much the same way. Flytrap, Rejectus, and Vladicor, all beaten to rubble, all wiped off the face of the earth by an enormous green dick. Last of all came Douchdonia itself. It was not to be spared. The monster came close to the city, but instead of going to town with another cock beating, the beast did stroke its shaft, slowly at first, then more rapidly. It wasn't too long before the destroyer did blow its creamy white load all over Douchdonia. The people below tried to escape in a blind panic, but there was no escape from the beast's love juice. All in the city were drowned in the thick monster muck. The Guardian's work was done. The Lord's servant had done well. The giant then took a moment to look out at all it had done. It then shrunk down to a much smaller size and proceeded towards the tar pit. The Guardian then stepped into the thick black goo and did slowly sink into the pit. The creature's head disappeared below the surface, and the pit started to gently bubble. This went on for a little while before calm returned. God enjoyed a good long laugh. What a beautiful scene he had created. God made all living things to disappear from the earth and sea. No creature, big or small, was left. Any remaining people left outside the cities at the time of their destruction were simply erased by the Lord. All he had to do was think it, and they were no more. The Almighty brought forth a cleansing storm which washed away all that had been made by the hand of man. Eventually the storm broke, and all was quiet. There was now perfect silence on the surface of the earth. The surface of the sea was completely still, as if it were a small pond. All of the clouds were removed from the skies, and the sun shined down on the golden sands and the blue waters. God looked down from on high and enjoyed the peace he saw beneath him. But his feeling of satisfaction would not last for too long. The Lord had created many other worlds, which were still full of people and a wide variety of other creatures. Although these worlds were different in many ways, they shared certain things in common. War was a constant. The will to dominate, the will to crush, the will to humiliate the enemy was everywhere. That people existed. It was also true that there was not a single person in any of these worlds who truly knew the nature of God. The Lord would tell his creations different things at different times. This was his show, and all danced to his chosen music. People believed that they had free will, and it was God's intention that they believe such a lie. But in truth, people were merely puppets of the Lord. They behaved as they did because they were made to behave in ways that God found amusing or challenging. God was good at amusing himself, but he was also lonely in a way that no mere mortal ever could be, for he had no equal. Therefore, he could never know true friendship. God would have people believe in their hearts that he was all-knowing, but of course there were states of mind that could only be experienced by mere mortals. this knowledge was naturally off limits to God, who was immortal. Not all people were equal. Some were smarter than others. Some asked questions while others didn't. God enjoyed variety. This world that God looked down on was a clean slate. The Lord then began to dream of a new world to be made here by his divine hand. He could bring forth new people from the black tar, new people he could torment, new playthings to fuck with in this way and that. The Lord was a God of love. He did love his creations as only he could. He loved their stupidity. He loved their helplessness. He loved their avarice and their lust. He loved the violence they inflicted on one another. He loved their screams and their suffering. He loved their fragility. He loved the fact that he could kill them with a single thought. God looked down into the tar pit. He took pleasure in staring into the black, thick goo. He dreamed the dreams of a celestial despot as he stared into the perfect blackness of the pit. He played with his divine cock as images of horrors to come flashed into his exalted mind.